Resident Evil Village makes almost every other Resident Evil game look like a paragon of nuance and restraint. Within its first hour, Capcom's latest foray into survival horror throws everything but the kitchen sink at hapless protagonist Ethan Winters, who returns from a life-altering ordeal in Resident Evil 7 for a new nightmare somewhere in Eastern Europe. Living a new life with wife Mia and 6-month-old baby Rose, it's not long before Ethan's world is turned upside down, and once again, his fingers, limbs, skin, and any other body part you'd care to mention are on the menu for dismemberment or mutilation. How Ethan manages to get through it all is beyond us, and often the entire experience beggars belief. With Resident Evils gone by, developer Capcom has managed to marshal a relatively slow burn opening. The first game made that initial sight of a zombie indelible, the second game made you freak out upon seeing a licker for the first time, the third game kept its powder relatively dry before revealing the nemesis, and even Resident Evil 4 ensured that the tension remained tight and oppressive after introducing you to its plague-ridden, muddy village inhabited by Ganados. In Resident Evil Village, or Resident Evil 8 if you like, the fuse is lit from the outset, exploding forth with vicious lichens and a carnival of oddballs all out to kill you at every turn. And, having jettisoned so much stuff into a potent mix of supernatural silliness from the outset, there isn't really anywhere else for Village to go. Or so you'd think. Once the game opens up, Ethan finds himself on the hunt for a set of 4 MacGuffin doodads, the contents of which won't be spoiled here. Each is guarded by one of the village's 4 lords, and from this point on you'll set about assembling a key that gradually grants access to each area, and a showdown with Resident Evil Village's cadre of boss characters, all striving to stop Ethan at the behest of the mysterious Mother Miranda. After a frenetic opening few hours, Village begins to settle into a stride of sorts, and the pace becomes slightly more measured, albeit for a few precious moments, finding time to put a smattering of smart puzzles in your path. Tubs of gunpowder, rusty scraps, herbs and chemical fluid enable you to craft valuable ammunition and health restoring elixirs, which are seldom in short supply. Consequently, the survival horror isn't all that difficult to survive. Factor in Ethan's guard and shove ability, which enables you to block enemy attacks and thrust them away with a hold and subsequent tap of the left bumper or the L1 button, and you're actually slightly too powerful. During its latter hours, Resident Evil Village also manages to squander its atmosphere in gothic weirdness. A mid-game dollhouse section stands out as a genuinely tense and creepy highlight befitting of Silent Hill, although that inevitably soon segues back into almost Resident Evil 6 levels of eye-rolling daftness. After an intro that hints at a folklore-infused Grimm's fairy tale, and the early promise of its snowy village outskirts and cold gothic castle, it's disappointing to see Village fly so spectacularly off the rails. Upon venturing into the factory location, any hope of the game returning to some semblance of smart or slow burn horror is hurled unceremoniously out of the window. The tension diminished by some of the stupidest enemies we've ever encountered in any Resident Evil game, enemies you'd expect to find as a result of some sort of harebrained experiment in Wolfenstein rather than this. Resident Evil 7 didn't exactly play it entirely straight, but it kept things comparatively grounded, unlike this direct sequel. Eventually the horror, such as it is, very quickly descends into the realm of the laughable, and any attempt at providing genuine chills or terror are sadly in vain. After the effort made with Resident Evil 7 to return to Resident Evil's roots, Village manages to flush much of that down the toilet in one fell swoop. We're certainly a long way from Raccoon City. In spite of all that, Resident Evil Village still proves enjoyable, if only to see what bonkers thing Capcom is going to conjure next. It looks positively lovely too, thanks to the consistently jaw-dropping RE engine, and even if it often induces a wince rather than real fear, the art direction, led by Tomonori Takano, is like nothing else. The return of RE4's attaché case and merchant, albeit as the jovial Duke, make resource management an involving aspect of the game, as you hoard currency and treasures to spend and trade. You can acquire new weapons, mods, upgrades and supplies to aid Ethan in his quest, and deciding the best way to spend your hard-earned coin adds a nice strategical layer to proceedings. Upon finishing the game you can also use the CP, that is completion points you've earned, to unlock Mercenaries mode. Like Mercenaries modes gone by, you're pitted against the clock and hordes of enemies, each section punctuated by a visit to the Duke to purchase new weapons and other valuable resources. You can break blue orbs to gain new buffs that include increased health, movement speed, health gains when using handguns, or other useful perks, while gold orbs can be interacted with and shattered for time extending bonuses. It's largely predictable, but a decent bonus with adequate replayability that's a more than welcome distraction worth dipping into now and again. How best to surmise Resident Evil Village then? If this review were to be presented simply as a cardiogram, the line would be all over the place. The overall experience is a messy hodgepodge of weird ideas that don't gel, and while things start promisingly enough, it takes only 2 to 3 hours before Capcom decides to throw everything at the wall to see what sticks. Much of it doesn't. If I were to describe to you some of the segments in RE Village, you wouldn't believe me. In context, they're unexpectedly bizarre, even by Resident Evil standards, and not necessarily in a good way. Actor Todd Soley's line delivery as Ethan is also quite poor, failing to engender any sense of danger or peril. Take for example his dispatching of a massive grisly boss later in the game, met with a cool "eat shit" like some sort of cheesy action hero. It's completely out of line with the tone we suspect Capcom was shooting for, although to be fair to Soley, he doesn't really have much to work with. Resident Evil Village is seemingly the work of fevered adult minds, and quite possibly the stupidest Resident Evil game since RE6, and that's a comparison I don't make lightly. There's still a great deal to like here, and anyone who loves Resident Evil 4, like me, will enjoy the shared DNA in some of the returning mechanics and evocative choices of location. However, the execution is severely fudged, the pace is drastically uneven, the set pieces are routinely ludicrous, some moments are unintentionally hilarious, and the only sign of restraint or nuance of any kind is in the excellent Dollhouse segment, which is overall too soon. The rest of Resident Evil Village is emblematic of Capcom letting its id run wild, forgetting that great horror often lies in what you don't see, rather than the big monster screaming directly into your face. Enjoyable in a mad pantomime sort of way, Resident Evil Village feels like a pretty significant step back from Resident Evil 7, and a toe back into the absurdity of Resident Evil 6. Shame. 2